Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 100. It's not about the shield. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the series, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. How are you doing today, Mike?
I am doing wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And did you know that we are recording our 100th episode today?
Wow. No, I did not know that.
Yeah. Yes, we are recording our 100th episode, and I decided to pull up a little bit of the analytics on YouTube to see what folks have thought about our podcast episodes, and here are the top 5 podcast episodes that we have produced here on the Stories Told podcast. Number 5 is Farewell, Dr. Jones, Please, which is our discussion about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Right, okay.
The number 4 is Dark Side of the Marvel, when we talked about the Moon Knight series.
Oh, nice.
Number 3 is Revenge of the Clones, which is when we talked about the movie The Island.
Right, okay, good.
Number 2 is Becoming a Hero, Avatar: The Last Airbender live action series, episodes 5 through 8, when we talked about that. So that was the second most popular video. And our most popular video by far is Not Your Mom's Breakfast Club, Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, which has almost 4 times as many views as the second most popular, the Avatar: The Last Airbender podcast episode.
Wow, that's interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. I wonder what caught people's attention on that one.
That's a great question. I don't know. If you are a fan of the podcast and you came aboard after watching the Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle podcast or listening to it episode, type into the comments what it is you liked about that episode, because I'm curious too as to what was so interesting about that particular one to make it the by far most popular video that we've produced so far. Yeah. Here's to another 200.
Yeah.
Or 300 or 400. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing it. So I'm
excited
that people are also enjoying it too.
As long as we keep finding good stories, then we'll keep doing it.
Right. So what's new in your writing world?
Let's see. New in my writing world. I'm just editing on Zara 2 still. Going through feedback from the editor. It seems like it should go so much faster than it does. Yeah. Most of it's fairly small and simple line edits, but there's a lot. So it just takes time going through. You have to analyze every one of them. I could just say accept all, but there's some things where I'm like, oh, I don't quite agree with that, or I like the suggestion and I want to change it to something else. So it does require some thought, and it's just time of going through, clicking on it, updating my document. Yeah, it's just time consuming, but it'll get there. That's what I'm doing though. What about you?
Well, before I tell you about me, I think that's what makes a good book though. It's this process, and it is time consuming and it is intense. But I think it's what takes a good book and turns it into a great book. If that,
or hopefully, at least an okay book into a good book, if nothing else.
Yeah, I hope so. If that's encouraging, this is where the magic comes in. Good for you for pushing through.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm recovering from a little bit of a cold. I've got a head cold, and so my energy levels have been inconsistent, and so I have not gotten much done in the way of writing. Just sort of been doing the minimum stuff that I need to do in order to just keep going with all the things that one has to juggle in their lives. And so fortunately, sitting down and watching The Falcon and the Winter Soldier is easy. It doesn't require a lot of brain power to sit down and go, oh, okay, I'm going to watch this. So I was able to do that, but not so much in the writing world, unfortunately. But I'll get back to it. I am feeling better. I can feel that I'm on the road to recovery, so I will get back to it.
All right, that's good to hear.
So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, and television?
I think just the same things I was talking about last time. Yeah, I had not much. I mean, I was watching The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So that occupied most of my time to consume stories for the week. So nothing new for me this week. What about you?
Obviously watching The Falcon and the Winter Soldier and still watching an episode of Doctor Who a day. So I think I just finished the Christmas special, The Runaway Bride with Catherine Tate.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I'm just about to start the series with Martha Jones.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. With the Jadoon platoon on the moon.
Yeah.
Which, funnily enough, I thought of that when I was watching Fifth Element. Because some of those bad guys reminded me of the Jadoon platoon on the moon.
Yeah, I could see that.
And I am still reading The Lord of the Rings as part of my comfort reading. But I have Skyward on the top of my TBR pile. And so we're going to talk about that soon, in the next couple of weeks. So Skyward by Brandon Sanderson will be coming up soon on my reading list. Are you ready to talk about The Falcon and the Winter Soldier?
Yes, I am.
Today we're talking about the story told in the series The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and I will read the short synopsis that comes up under Google. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier are a mismatched duo who team up for a global adventure that will test their survival skills as well as their patience. Did you enjoy this series?
Yeah, I did. When I first saw it, I saw it when it came out originally, and I thought it was fine. I thought it was a good show. I don't remember if this is the first one or the second one that Marvel did with the MCU, but I thought it was competently done. Now rewatching it, I think I appreciate it more. I still don't think it's an amazing show, but now that I kind of realize that it's more of a drama than an exciting superhero action adventure story or something weirder like WandaVision, I can look at it as sort of a high level. I think the writing works for what they were going for, and the story does a good job of dealing with the characters in terms of the aftermath of what came before and kind of where they're going next. That said, I did like a lot of the action scenes. I thought the opening action scene was cool, very fun, and it served a purpose, right? It shows Sam's competence and his potential worthiness to take on the role of Captain America. So, and I think there's a number of scenes like that. A number of the action scenes have a role rather than just being action. So I think they did that pretty well too, for the most part. But mostly, I think what works is the characters, right? The main characters in particular. We get to see Bucky and how he's kind of feeling lost in the world. And even though we couldn't possibly be in his shoes, it's very relatable. You can totally see how someone in that position would feel, right? He was this person who was brainwashed and controlled to do horrible things, right? To kill people. He was basically their assassin. And now that he's out of that, he still has to deal with it, right? That he has all of those memories and he has the struggle with all that destruction and killing he did as the Winter Soldier. So that felt plausible. It felt realistic from a character perspective that he'd have to go through that. And you can sympathize with him. So I think seeing those elements in the Marvel Universe are necessary it can't just be all action scenes and exciting special effects all the time. Can't just be always jokes. So I think the series works on that level. I liked how they connected the series with events that had come before and characters. So we get reintroduced to Zemo from Captain America: Civil War, which is cool. We see the Wakandans coming back in to deal with Zemo, which was good. So kind of tying up little loose ends from the movies. I think they did a pretty good job with that. And then I liked where they went with some things at sort of a larger level, kind of the impetus of the show, right? The group of people fighting to have humans united again without national boundaries. One world, one people, I think is what they were saying. Because the whole world came together after the blip to support each other. I thought that was a really cool idea. And there's people who would want that back, right? That's very believable that could happen. Given the context of, superheroes, obviously, there's a mountain of suspension of disbelief you have to go into a superhero universe with. But given that, I think this other stuff is believable. It's also believable that, they would make more super soldiers, because of course they would. Somebody would. Someone would have figured that out and had more super soldiers. You can't just let that technology lie. So all that made sense, and I think they made good use of it. And I think it was good to have it in this show with these characters, particularly with Sam struggling to determine whether or not he wanted to be Captain America. And yeah, I think all that made sense. It also presents some interesting questions, moral questions and philosophical questions, like, are people who seeking power always corrupt? Do the ends justify the means? That kind of thing. What would it mean to try to step into the role of someone whose shoes you could never fill? You have a Captain America who everybody looks up to, right? Regardless of his flaws, the people don't see that. So you've got this guy who's a hero that's larger than life, and now there's an expectation that, you're going to fill that role, and it's like feeling not worthy about that. So there's a lot of things like that I think are really cool. They did a lot of good philosophical stuff in this show. I think they did a good job setting up the relationship between the new Captain America, John Walker, and his sort of sidekick guy, Lamar. We see that John kind of relied on Lamar for advice and for guidance and for support along the way. They're tight friends, have been through a lot, so that when he gets killed, we see why Walker snapped. Right? It's like they built that up. So I think they did a good job with that. And they also set up that they had maybe done some not so great things when they were, in the war in Afghanistan, to let us know that this is someone who could be capable of something dark. So when that moment comes, it's believable. So I think they did a lot of good things setting up and paying them off, doing a lot of good foreshadowing. I like the relationship between Sam and Bucky. It's rocky, but there's also a banter there and a respect there. These guys, they support each other despite differences and concerns they have. I think that was good. I think the main one, obviously, with the main transformation that Sam has to go through as the Falcon is he going to take on the mantle of Captain America? And I think they did a good job of where he starts with, I'm not worthy of this. No one's going to want me to do this, to realizing, I need to do this. This was bestowed upon me by someone who I respect. The other person who took up this mantle didn't do so great with it, but the world needs this character, so I'm going to step up to the plate. And that's the primary arc of the show, but there's also the other arcs going on too. And I think overall they did a pretty good job. So yeah, I liked it, and I think there's a lot of good, like, high level writing stuff that goes on in the show. What did you think?
I agree. I too appreciated this more on a second watching. It reminded me a lot of Captain America: Winter Soldier. When we first started watching, it was structured the same way and had the same sort of feel of, starting off with a bang, with Falcon going in and rescuing someone rather than a blatantly good guy versus bad guy kind of thing that you might see in a different superhero movie. It was more political at the very beginning. You're rescuing an important person that's being kidnapped by people, and it's all very hush-hush and over, you got to stay within particular borders, and, this is a quiet low key kind of thing. It was very much like what happened when Cap went to the Lemurian Star in Winter Soldier. So I appreciated that because I think you're right. This is more of a drama, and it set that tone right away. And I think I might have missed it the first time because I was looking for a more superhero adventure kind of thing.
Yeah, me too.
Picking up that tone this time, I was like, okay, this is actually really good. I was very, very impressed, however, and I agree with you, the entire backbone of this series is the characters arcs, the character development, the character placement, the character continuity was so well done. And one of the things that impressed me the most was what I saw as character continuums. We were essentially being shown a wide variety of examples of what Captain America could be under certain circumstances. And what does it mean to be Captain America? So we were shown stuff like along what I call the super soldier continuum, right? We had Bucky, who was the worst possible outcome of super soldier, right? He's now recovering, but the things that he did were the worst things that someone could do with the super soldier skills. The super soldier, I don't know, benefits. I don't what was a good word for that. Anyway,
skills.
Yeah. And then you had John Walker, who was a fine soldier and a fine person to take orders and deliver orders in what was the context of the contemporary military in this story, but then who got the serum and started to head down that path like Bucky, all on his own without actually any brainwashing from bad people. So he was sort of in this middle place. And then you had Sam, who never had the serum and who was essentially trying to maintain his ideology, his morality, his ethics as he navigates his way through all these questions that need to be answered. And so you had that continuum with them. Then you had another continuum where you had, what does it mean to be Captain America? What does it mean to serve your country? What I call the continuum of jaded and hopefulness. And you had that anchored by Isaiah, a black super soldier who was essentially abused and never appreciated for the sacrifices that he made for his country. And then you had, again, you put John Walker in the middle there, who decided to become Captain America and then opted to take the serum. He had the choice to take the serum and then tried to figure out what to do with that. And then once again, you have Sam, who's hopeful in his grounding of who he wants to be and what he's going to do. So I thought that continuum was all these comparisons and contrasts that we were seeing from these characters. And then you had sort of like, what does it mean to be good and what does it mean to be bad continuum with Zemo and with Sharon Carter and with Bucky trying to make amends for the terrible things that he did in his life. I thought it was just absolutely fascinating. And the whole point of this was to figure out what it meant to be Captain America, looking at it from all these different facets. I thought it was brilliantly done, but it was very subtle. And I could see where people might not catch that because it wasn't, I don't know, I don't think it was that overt, but maybe that's just me. maybe it was just subtle to me.
No, I think coming after, Avengers, Infinity War, and Endgame, this was kind of like, okay, we're going to take a step back and we're going to focus just on these characters and where they went. And I think, I don't know what the reception to this show was, but I could see it being a little disappointed because it wasn't, the same kind of thing that we got from those two huge movies.
Yeah.
It was more character. But looking at it from a character perspective, I do think there was some really good writing. Even with John Walker, right? He steps up as Captain America, and it's like, well, they wanted to give it to someone. They gave it to this guy, and we're not rooting for him because, we're rooting for Sam, presumably, because that's who the original Captain America gave him to. But at the same time, you can understand him. Like his writing for him is reasonable. It's like, hey, work with us instead of against us. Like you could totally see it from his point of view. It's like, yeah, why aren't they doing that, right? Why aren't the Falcon and Winter Soldier working together with them? Like he's a Captain America, like support him.
Yeah.
So it's very believable, and it's not until later where you're like, okay, I don't really want to buy off on this guy anymore after he, murdered that dude basically. But up to that point, it's understandable.
Yeah, and I love what they did with that character because they told us who he was from moment one. We meet him in a high school locker room reviewing the glory days, I'm assuming as a football player in high school. He is presented from moment one as a kind of an immature character.
Yeah.
He is inexperienced, and by immature, I don't mean it as like, oh, you're so immature. I mean like he is not fully grown yet. He has not learned the things that he needs to learn. Because the next scene we see, or one of the next scenes we see, he and Laura are playing with a police car's siren. They're children in some ways.
Yeah.
And they're not yet in a place where they have the maturity to do the job that they've been asked to do. And that's another contrast that then we see, Bucky with his 100 years of life experience and Sam with his experience as an Avenger and seeing all the good and the bad that he has seen done by superheroes and having been on the run after making a choice that he thought was the right choice and being, imprisoned for it. You just see the difference between these two characters. Same with Sharon Carter, right? She made the same choice as Sam did on the run, except she made a very different life decision after she made her choice that she thought was the right thing to do and then suffered the consequences from it. It's just, again, the contrasts are so amazing.
Yeah, I think they did a good job.
That being said, is there anything that you might have changed as a writer?
Yeah, for me, I'm just going to look at like high level stuff rather than, smaller things. One of the things that didn't work for me was the whole part with Sam's sister and the boat. It just seemed kind of small in the context of the show and what the characters were doing and a bit irrelevant. And the idea that an Avenger wouldn't be financially compensated enough to even qualify for a loan just seems ridiculous. It's like that does not seem believable given what happened in this world. And I'm not really sure what role Sam's sister played given all the other character stuff that was going on. It seemed like she was just there as sort of a prop to give him some kind of down home grounding and backstory. She wasn't really supporting him. She wasn't dissuading him from a path. She wasn't encouraging or discouraging, really. She was just kind of doing her own thing, and honestly, it didn't seem like she cared much one way or the other about what he did. so I don't know. I'm not sure how to change that. I just don't know that whole thing was even important or necessary in this story. There was so much else going on. It didn't seem particularly useful in the grand scheme of it. And then this is sort of a smaller thing, but it goes to character. So I get when Sam first met with Carly, right? When he wants to talk to her to try to talk her down. It's still kind of in the middle of the story. And then John Walker as Captain America comes in and sort of ruins that whole sequence. But by the end of the story, she made it quite clear that she's a terrorist and a maniac. So it didn't make sense to me for him to still want to talk to her at that point. Oh, let's have a discussion. Maybe we can change. It's like, dude, she made it clear. She's not changing. Here's what her plan is. She's going to kill what she needs to kill. At that point, she's clearly terrorist, responsible for so many deaths. He should have just been immediately trying to take her out or lock her up, to do whatever needed to be done, to call in backup to ensure that the job got done. So for him to still want to try to talk to her at the end seemed kind of dumb for his character. We got the message already that he's a reasonable guy and a good guy and he'd prefer not to fight. But at that point, he just seemed like a dumb sap. So I wouldn't have had that. So those are two things that stood out to me. I mean, there's a lot of other little stuff, but those are the bigger things. What about you? Would you improve anything?
Those are really great examples. And they're examples of exactly what my note was, which is inconsistent pacing. And the inconsistent pacing goes to exactly what you just pointed out. There could have been a way to give us some of Sam's life backstory, some of his personal life, so that we understand him better. He's more well-rounded. We see who he is because we get to see his family. I don't think there needed to be conflict in that arena, or at least not conflict that took him away from what he needed to be focused on for the bulk of the story here with Carly and the other terrorists. I think if it had been like, for example, that's where he went when he retreated, when they essentially took him off, when he and Bucky were benched, he went down to help his sister. I think that would have been great. That's part of a story structure where when the hero loses, the hero needs to regroup.
Yeah.
And so going down and helping his sister paint the boat and take care of things, I think that would have been a great time for that point in a story to regroup. I think otherwise throwing it in kind of really slows the pace of the story. And I agree. I don't think it really served a purpose. And similarly, I agree that there was some wonderful things said, quotes made, some good dialogue in this episode, but some of the speeches went too long. The point was made.
Yeah.
Stop. Yeah, and I think that just sort of lent to inconsistent pacing throughout. I think the Dora actually helped ramp up the pacing, which was helpful, because otherwise that could have been a slow pacing thing, but throwing the Dora in ramped things up really well. I think that was beautifully woven in, and it wasn't too much. It was just enough to make it feel real, but not too much that we were like hanging out with the Dora instead of hanging out with Falcon and Winter Soldier. So that was my big concern. It was just pacing. That being said, this was only a 6-episode series, which I think was the perfect amount of time spent. I would have just tightened up a few things in individual episodes.
Yeah, I agree. Having only 6, I think, was good. They didn't try to stretch it out too long. And I agree with what you said about the pacing too. And I think that's one of the reasons I noticed the whole boat and sister, part of the plot, because it just seemed to really drag when he was back there. And that's what made me think of, like, is this even necessary? Like, what is this doing for his character? Like you said, it's like having him being having a place to retreat and go back to, whatever. That could have been fine, and you could have just made it a lot shorter. And like you said, not necessarily make it a source of conflict. Or if it was, have her, I don't know. I mean, having her being against him becoming Captain America. We already have Isaiah as that character who does that, who fills that role. Yeah. She didn't need that. Yeah. She could have just been encouraging to him, and left it at that. And that could have been, a source of warmth for him. And that's all it was. And even have the boat thing. And it's like he's trying to help her. And it's like, it introduced silliness for me. Like I said, I think if you just kept it simpler, it would have been better.
Did you draw any themes from the Falcon and the Winter Soldier?
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on here, right? I mean, we kind
of there really is.
We hit on a bunch of things as we talked about it. There's a lot of like subtle philosophical elements throughout. If I look at the main characters, I think there's theme of doing the right thing despite what other people think about it. That's kind of where Sam goes with stepping up to become Captain America. He finally realizes, you know what, I've got to do this. Isaiah is like, you can't do that. They won't accept a black man doing this. And he's like, well, I'm doing it anyway. Right? And there's that concept of being true to yourself, regardless of what other people think, is a key element to this story. Maybe also understanding that you may not be up to the expectations of others or even yourself, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. I think that's a theme that's going on here. I think there's a theme of working with people who want the same outcome rather than against them or in competition with them. In terms of, like the other Captain America, John Walker, and them, they're kind of on the same team, but not really working together. That was one thing. With Bucky, I think there's this concept of you have to make real amends. I forget how he put it. Making real amends, accepting the results of doing so. If you truly want to apologize, or at least get on a path of forgiving yourself, you've got to kind of accept things, that happened, and the outcomes of dealing with that, of apologizing in a real way. I don't know what I'm trying to say there, but there's some kind of theme that was going on there. What did you come up with?
Those are all really good. You're absolutely correct. There is so much in this series that you can pull from, and I like the ones that you pulled. And I especially agree that Bucky's arc is complex and full of pathos and difficult, and I'm glad that they incorporated it in with this story, because I think it was important, again, to show the sort of the contrast with what Sam was dealing with. The theme that I actually pulled out was decide who you want to be. And the reason I picked that one is because that is essentially at the crux of all of these characters' decision making throughout. They have these things that happened to them that they had no control over, which happens to everyone. For Sam, Cap died, and he handed off the shield to Sam. Sam had no control over that, but he did have to decide what to do next. And Bucky was forced to be the Winter Soldier, and now he's free and he has to decide what to do. And the same goes for John Walker, the same goes for Carly, the same goes for Sharon, the same goes for Zemo. They're all handed hands they don't necessarily like. What are they going to do? Who are they going to be now that they've had these things happen? And I think that's essentially like the crux for all of these people. And so that's why I kind of pulled that theme out. Decide who you want to be.
That's great because we see counterexample, right, with Isaiah.
Yeah.
And Sam's path. Isaiah's like, look, here's what you got to do. You can't do this, can't do that. And Sam decides against that, right? He decided a different path. So I like that a lot.
As a writer, what do you take away from the Falcon and the Winter Soldier?
Oh, for me, I mean, there's a lot here, actually. A lot that was done well. I think for me, let's see, I'm trying to come up with something different. I think if you have multiple protagonists, as we did here, remember to give each of them their own path, right?
Yeah.
Their own transformation they go through and their own theme. And as you pointed out, try to make those themes connect or complement each other. And I think they did that really well. So that's my takeaway.
Yeah, that's a good
What
one.
did you come up with?
Something very similar. I love how they have these characters serving as points of comparison for the main character, Sam. In my mind, I see all these characters on a Venn diagram with overlapping issues, similar issues that they have with each other.
Oh, that's cool.
But then making different choices, even with the same issue. And I think that's really brilliant because it then really highlights the value of what the main character does in the end and the decision that he makes. So I think that's a really cool thing to do. And I would love to be able to do that myself.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so the compare and contrast characters, right? The character development. I like that a lot.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in the TV series, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in the movie, Captain America, Brave New World. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.